He financed a $100,000 truck on a $64,000 salary, and for 4 years, he managed not to do the math. Then the envelope arrived, and the number inside was $241,000. The truck was black, not a working black, not a practical color chosen to hide road grime, a deep showroom black that caught light like a mirror and held it. Cole stood in the dealership lot the first time he saw it and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with horsepower or payload capacity. It sat high off the ground the way certain things do that are meant to make you feel elevated just by proximity. He was 30 years old, making $64,000 a year doing HVAC inspections in a commercial building that would never belong to him. And for a moment, standing in that lot, hand on the door handle, none of that felt true. That's what he was really buying, not the truck, the feeling that the numbers didn't apply to him. The payment was $1,847 a month. Cole heard it, did a version of the math in his head, a fast, optimistic version where he didn't account for insurance or the gas the thing drank or the credit card minimums already drafted before his direct deposit cleared, and told himself it was manageable. That word, manageable. It does a lot of work when you need it to. His take-home after taxes was around $3,900. He was about to commit just under half of it to a vehicle before he'd paid rent, bought food, or touched the $14,000 in card balances he was already carrying. The salesman's pen hovered. Cole reached for it. He told himself he'd earned this. The envelope showed up 9 weeks after he drove the truck home. IRS letterhead, a return address he recognized without reading it fully, his name typed in that flat government font that makes everything feel final. Cole sat in the truck cab in his apartment parking lot, the engine still ticking warm, and held it for maybe 45 seconds. Then he opened the glove box, slid it behind the registration and an old gas receipt, and closed the latch with a soft click. He told himself he'd deal with it when he had more bandwidth. That was his word. Bandwidth. Like he was a system that needed a lighter load before he could process bad news. The envelope stayed there. Weeks went by, then months. Before any of this, Cole's life looked completely ordinary. And ordinary, from the outside, looked fine. He had a 1-bedroom apartment in a decent part of town, a facilities job at a commercial property management company, a salary that went up slightly every 2 years in a way that felt like progress. He was competent at work, organized, dependable, the guy who knew where the shutoff valves were. And his coworkers liked him. He paid his bills, most of them, on time, mostly. If you'd looked at the surface of Cole Whitman's life in 2021, you would have seen a guy doing okay. What you wouldn't have seen was the ledger underneath, because Cole wasn't looking at it either. The gambling started as something social, almost casual, a poker app a coworker mentioned on a Thursday, $10 to buy in, something to do when the apartment felt too quiet. Cole was good enough at it early on that it felt like skill. He won $63 the first night and told himself he had a knack. Then he lost it, plus 40, the next week. And here's the thing about that first real loss, the thing Cole would understand much later. It didn't feel like losing. It felt like being this close, like the right hand was 1 card away, 1 session away, and the money wasn't gone. It was just temporarily somewhere else waiting for him to come claim it. That feeling, the near miss, is the most expensive feeling in the world. There's a specific logic to chasing a loss, and it sounds completely reasonable from inside it. You're not gambling more. You're correcting an imbalance. The math will even out. It always does. Cole told himself that story for 4 years, and each chapter of the story cost him money to tell. A bad month became a bad quarter. A bad quarter became a year where he borrowed against a credit card to cover what the poker app had taken. He never thought of it as a $150,000 problem because it never arrived as one. It arrived as $400 here, $1,100 there, a $2,200 swing on a Friday night that he needed the weekend to recover from emotionally before he could look at his account. By the time the number reached 6 figures, Cole had stopped counting. Counting would have required facing it. The first time Glen and Patricia stepped in, it was 2021, and nobody named it what it was. Cole had run short on rent, $1,200 short, which felt specific enough to explain away. And he called his mother on a Tuesday night and said he'd had some unexpected expenses. Patricia said, "Of course," before he finished the sentence. Glen didn't say much. He never said much about money, and Cole had always read that silence as acceptance. 2 days later, the transfer appeared in his account, and Cole paid the rent and told himself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. Over the next 3 years, money moved from Glen and Patricia's savings to Cole's checking account in amounts that ranged from $600 to $3,400. Never enough to feel alarming, always enough to close the gap. The silence continued, and silence at a certain point is just permission with a quieter name. Cole's relationship with his credit cards was what he'd later describe as peripheral. He was aware of them the way you're aware of a noise in the walls. Present, not urgent, not today's problem. Over 3 years, the balances grew from $14,000 to $50,000, mostly on minimums paid just on time, the kind of on time that keeps the late fees off but leaves the principal almost completely untouched. He'd open the statements on his phone, see the balance, and immediately navigate somewhere else. To his email, to the poker app, to anything that wasn't the number. He called this managing it. The statements sat on his kitchen table sometimes, unopened, while Cole scrolled beside them. $50,000 of debt, and he never looked directly at it. That's not denial as a character flaw. That's denial as a coping strategy, and it works right up until it doesn't. He filed his taxes the first 2 years without trouble. Nothing complicated. Standard W-2, a refund both times in the low hundreds. Then 2020 hit a rough patch, and Cole's records were a mess, and April came, and he thought, next year, I'll do both. Next year came. He didn't. By 2022, the math of catching up felt so steep that starting felt worse than waiting, which is a particular trap that the IRS has no patience for. Penalties compound, interest compounds. The longer you wait, the more monstrous the number, and the more monstrous the number, the harder it becomes to open the shoebox of receipts on the shelf, and the shoebox sits there, and the years stack up. 6 years. Cole had not filed federal taxes in 6 years. He knew it. He thought about it briefly, every April, and then April would pass, and he'd feel a low specific relief, and start the clock on year 7. The thing about maintaining a self-image is that it has real costs. They just don't show up on a single line item. Cole went out for dinner with coworkers on Fridays, because that's what a person who was doing okay did. He picked up the check sometimes, because generosity at a restaurant is one of the cheapest ways to feel wealthy in the short term. He went to Vegas once with 3 guys from work, just the one time, and came back having spent $1,800 he didn't have. He kept his apartment reasonably clean and his truck immaculate and his work clothes presentable. None of this was extravagance exactly. It was maintenance. The maintenance of a story about himself that required constant small expenditures to keep feeling true. At a certain level of debt, the self-image stops being a side effect and starts being a second mortgage. The CP 2000 notice arrived on a Wednesday in late October. Cole recognized the envelope, IRS, the specific shape of it, the weight. And he stood at his mailbox for a moment and then took it upstairs and sat at his kitchen table and opened it. He read the first paragraph, then the number. Then he folded it carefully back along its original creases, slid it into the manila envelope it had come in, carried it down to the truck, and put it in the glove box. He was at work by 8:15. He did not think about it for the rest of the day. Or he tried not to, which is a different thing. The envelope was in the glove box now. It had a home. And as long as it had a home and wasn't on his kitchen table, it was somehow not yet real. Not yet. Glen called on a November evening, and his voice had that particular evenness Cole had learned to read as news coming. He and Patricia were selling the house. They'd found a retirement community in Tucson, single floor, manageable, the right size for 2 people who didn't need a 4-bedroom anymore. It was a practical call. Glen was practical. He didn't say anything about Cole's name not being in the plan. He didn't need to. Cole stood by his apartment window watching the truck in the lot below, half listening, saying, "Yeah," and "that makes sense," in the right places. When he hung up, the apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been before the call. Not silent. He could hear the street, a neighbor's TV. But quiet in the way that a door being closed somewhere in your future can make everything around you suddenly very still. The refund was supposed to be $1,840. Cole had already spent it in his head. February's visa minimum, a partial payment on the Discover card, maybe a tank of gas and something that wasn't ramen. He checked the banking app on a Tuesday morning before his first coffee had gone cold, and the deposit wasn't there. In its place was a transaction description he had to read twice. IRS offset, applied to balance owed. The number in his account was $0.00, where $1,840 should have been. He set the phone face down on the table. He picked it back up. The number was still 0. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from the state DMV. He didn't open that one slowly. The format told him everything before he got through the first paragraph. His driver's license was suspended, flagged under a federal tax lien. His passport, the notice explained in bureaucratic shorthand, carried a hold. Cole read the word hold and thought about the one trip he'd ever taken. A long weekend in Cancun 3 years ago on a credit card he still hadn't paid down. The debt wasn't just in the accounts anymore. It had reached into his wallet, into his pocket, into the physical fact of who he was allowed to be and where he was allowed to go. Patricia called on a Sunday evening, which was unusual. She didn't do small talk the way she normally did. No questions about work, no asking whether he'd eaten. She said they were settled in Tucson, that the house had closed, that she and Glen were grateful for the retirement community and grateful for each other. And then she said it the way only a mother can, gently and completely. The transfers were stopping. She loved him. This was the last call about money. Cole said he understood. He said she shouldn't worry. He said it like a man who had been saying versions of that sentence his whole adult life, and both of them knew, in the silence that followed, exactly how much it was worth. He ran out of grocery money on a Thursday, not metaphorically, not almost, actually out. He walked into the Kroger 2 blocks from his building with $34 in his account and a basket, and somewhere between the pasta aisle and the dairy case, he did the arithmetic and put the block of cheese back. Then the second thing. He stood there for a moment with his hand on a box of crackers, doing the math on crackers, and something about that specific calculation, that he had gotten to the place where crackers required a calculation, hit him differently than any number he'd ever ignored. Debt you can avoid looking at. A grocery basket you're holding right now, you cannot. The plan he made that night was not nothing. Overtime, he'd pick up weekend shifts, even double shifts if the department would allow it. He'd cut the subscriptions, all 4 of them. He'd call the smallest credit card and make a real payment, not just the minimum. He wrote it out in pencil on the back of a grocery receipt because that's what was on the table. And when he read it back, it looked like progress. It looked like a man taking control. The narrator's voice here, mine, is the one that has to tell you, I thought that version of the plan was going to be enough. It wasn't. The overtime was approved for exactly 9 days. Then Cole's supervisor posted a notice on the break room bulletin board. Overtime suspended, budget review, effective immediately. Cole read it from the doorway in his Carhartt jacket, coffee in hand, and the particular cruelty of it was that he hadn't even deposited the first overtime check yet. He'd already subtracted it from his mental balance. He'd already spent it the way you spend money you don't have. In advance, in hope, in the story you tell yourself about how this time things are turning around. The check came. The notice went up. The one active strategy he had was gone before it could do anything. He sat in the truck that Friday night, not going anywhere, just sitting in it, in the parking lot outside his building at 11 o'clock. The engine was off. The dashboard was dark. He had his hands in his lap and he was looking at the steering wheel, which cost more than his first car. The truck payment was $1,180 a month. He had $34 spent on groceries that week. He was sitting inside $100,000 of debt that depreciated every month, unable to buy the block of cheese he'd put back. He didn't have a word for what he felt. But something moved, something quiet and necessary, because he got out of the truck, went upstairs, and for the first time in months, he didn't turn the TV on. He got the envelope from the glove box before he went to sleep. He didn't open it that night, but he set it on the kitchen table, which was the first time it had been anywhere other than that glove box in 4 months. In the morning, he made coffee, sat down, and tore it open the way you tear off a bandage, quickly, before you can talk yourself out of it. IRS Notice CP 504. Intent to levy wages, 6 tax years. Penalties compounded on interest, compounded on penalties. The total owed $47,000. He read it once, he read it again. He put it face up on the table and did not put it back in the envelope. He found a legal pad in the kitchen drawer, the kind with the yellow pages and the red margin line, and he sat down and wrote everything out for the first time in one place. Truck loan balance, $88,000. Credit cards, $50,000 across 4 cards. Gambling losses absorbed on those cards and personal loans. The rough number he could reconstruct was $150,000 over 4 years. Back taxes, $47,000. Student loans he hadn't thought about since 2019, $91,000. He added the column 3 times because the first 2 times he assumed he'd made an error. He hadn't. He drew a line under the total and wrote the number. Then he wrote $64,000 beside it, his salary, as if that context would help. It did not help. There wasn't a dramatic moment. No tears, no overturned chairs. He just sat there with the legal pad and the lamp and the number. $241,000. And he felt something he didn't have an exact word for until later. It was like a door closing on a version of himself he'd been quietly maintaining for years. The version who was almost caught up, almost getting it together, almost about to sort the taxes out. Almost. That version required a certain amount of energy to sustain. And somewhere in the quiet of that kitchen at midnight, he just stopped sustaining it. He didn't know what came next. But the almost was gone. And something about that felt, strangely, like the first honest thing in a long time. He didn't search debt relief or click on any of the ads that had been following him around the internet for months, the ones promising to settle his IRS debt for as little as 10 cents on the dollar. He'd seen those. He knew, dimly, that they were mostly theater. What he searched instead was Enrolled Agent IRS Installment Agreement State CPA Board Referral. It took him 40 minutes and 3 browser tabs. He found Imani Osei through the state's licensed practitioner directory. Her website was spare and professional, no testimonials with dollar amounts, no countdown timers. She listed her credentials and her process. That was it. He wrote down her number on the legal pad under the column of debts and went to sleep. Imani's office was not what he expected. It was clean and plain. A desk, 2 chairs, a plant on the windowsill, morning light. She shook his hand once, sat down, and asked him to lay out what he had. She did not wince at the 6 unfiled years. She did not say anything about the gambling. She took the legal pad he'd brought and read it the way a doctor reads a chart, with attention but without alarm. And then she explained how IRS installment agreements worked, what the filing sequence needed to be, and what the next 30 days had to look like. Cole had been to banks, to dealerships, to financial conversations of various kinds for 15 years. He had never, until that morning, actually listened to one. Then Imani paused, tapped her pen on the worksheet, and said something Cole hadn't expected. 2 of his unfiled years, 2019 and 2020, actually showed a small refund owed back to him. Not much, maybe $1,100 combined. But applied against penalty interest, it trimmed the total slightly. The narrator in Cole's head had already written the worst possible version of every number, and the real version was still brutal, just a fraction less so. Imani said it plainly. This doesn't change the plan, but it changes the starting point a little. Cole leaned forward. It was the first time in 4 years that math had moved in his direction. Cole called the truck's finance company from his apartment window, looking down at it in the lot. He'd Googled the difference between voluntary surrender and repossession the night before, and the difference mattered. Both hurt your credit, but voluntary surrender meant Cole chose the exit instead of waiting for them to take it. He'd spent 4 years in that truck avoiding choices. This one, he was making himself. The rep on the phone walked him through the paperwork in a tone that had clearly handled this call before. No judgment, just process. Cole wrote down every term on the legal pad. The truck was already starting to feel like someone else's problem. He turned in the keys on a Thursday morning, not a dramatic moment. A service counter, a lot attendant, a surrender form with 3 signature lines. Cole signed where they told him to sign. He didn't watch them take it. He just folded his copy of the paperwork, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked outside to the bus stop. The bus came 11 minutes later. He sat by the window and didn't think about much. What he felt wasn't grief, exactly. It was closer to relief with a bruise on it. The first financially honest thing he'd done in 4 years, and it came at a bus stop in November. Donte Price mentioned his cousin almost as an aside. They were eating lunch in the break room when Cole said he needed a car. "Like, what kind of budget?" Donte asked. Cole said $6,000. Donte nodded like that was completely workable and texted his cousin before the lunch break ended. The car was a 2017 silver sedan, nothing remarkable, 94,000 miles, drove straight. Cole handed over a thin envelope of cash in a residential driveway on a Saturday and felt something he hadn't felt in years standing next to a vehicle. Proportion. The car fit his life. That was the whole criteria, and it was enough. He called the credit card servicers on a Monday morning with coffee still fresh and the legal pad open. 4 cards, 4 calls. He explained his situation the same way each time. Not the full story, just, "I'm in a hardship situation, I'm working with a tax professional, I need to know what options are available." 2 of them had hardship programs, temporary reduced minimums, interest pauses for 90 days. The other 2 said no. Cole wrote it all down anyway. Dates, rep names, reference numbers. Documentation felt like the opposite of denial. He'd spent years not writing things down because writing them down made them real. Now, real was the only version he trusted. Imani filed all 6 years in a single submission. Cole sat in her office while she walked him through the installment agreement terms, $380 a month to the IRS, beginning 60 days after acceptance, running for 10+ years. She explained that once the agreement was approved, the license suspension would lift. The state's flag was tied to the lien status, and an active payment plan changed the lien standing. Cole didn't fully track every legal mechanism. What he tracked was this: $380 a month, and he got his license back. He took the copy of the submitted paperwork with both hands and held it for a second before he put it in his jacket. Imani said, "You'll hear back in 30 to 45 days. He nodded and stood up. Month 1 ended on a Sunday night. Cole sat at the kitchen table with a printed budget spreadsheet, the first one he'd ever finished, not just started, and ran the final tally. Income in, every obligation out, every minimum paid. The number at the bottom was $214. Positive, $214. After $241,000 in debt, after 4 years of chasing losses and ignoring envelopes, the first month's margin was $214. He circled it in pen. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at it for a while, and then he wrote, "Month 1, done," at the top of the page. That's what the beginning looks like. Not a comeback, just a number you can point to and say, "I didn't go backwards tonight." He called his parents on a Tuesday, not to ask for anything. He'd written that down before he dialed, just to keep himself honest. Glen picked up first, passed the phone to Patricia. Cole told them about the installment plan, the truck, the sedan, month 1. Glen said, "Okay," in the way Glen said most things, which was not cold, just contained. Patricia said she was glad. Her voice had a quality Cole recognized, the sound of someone who'd been waiting a long time for a particular sentence. The call lasted 12 minutes. When Cole hung up, he sat on the couch and felt something he couldn't quite name. Not pride, more like accountability. The $380 IRS payment hadn't cost him anything emotionally. That call had. Here's what I kept coming back to when I thought about Cole's story. The truck wasn't about getting to work, the gambling wasn't about winning money, and the envelopes sitting unopened in the glove box, that wasn't about being too busy to open. All of it was about one thing: avoiding the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic was going to tell him something about himself that he wasn't ready to hear. The truck said he was doing well. The gambling said the next hand was the one. The sealed envelope said the problem wasn't real yet. Denial is expensive. It charges you the same whether you're looking at the bill or not. The part that gets me isn't that Cole was reckless. It's that he wasn't really. He made one purchase that was too big, and then spent 4 years building a life around the story that justified it. Most of us don't fall off a cliff. We take one step too far, and then take another step to explain the first one. The gap between what we earn and what we feel entitled to. That's the engine. That's where it starts. Cole made $64,000 a year. He didn't feel like a $64,000 a year person, and the distance between those two things ended up costing him $241,000 and 4 years of his life. 18 months in, Cole's license came back. The IRS accepted the installment agreement, and the state flag cleared about 6 weeks later. His passport hold lifted a month after that. He's current on $380 a month to the IRS. 2 of his credit cards are in hardship programs. The other 2 he's paying minimum on, and the sedan runs fine. The hole is still $241,000 deep. He's moved about $8,000 of dirt. At that pace, with that salary, this is a decade plus of shoveling, and he knows it. What changed wasn't the number. What changed was that Cole stopped pretending the hole wasn't there and started showing up every month with a shovel. Patience and discipline are not a redemption arc. They don't feel triumphant. They feel like $380 leaving your account on the first of every month for 10 years. They feel like a used sedan and a packed lunch and a budget spreadsheet you actually finish. Cole isn't a cautionary tale, and he isn't an inspiration. He's just a person who finally picked up the tools that were always there and started. That's the whole story. If any part of it sat with you, the unopened envelope, the gap between income and lifestyle, the moment you did the real math, then you already know what the first step looks like. It looks like Cole at a kitchen table with a legal pad. Whenever you're ready, the Greed's Kingdom free first lesson is linked below. No pitch, just the start. Cole sold the truck, opened the envelope, and started month 1 of a very long climb. No windfall, no shortcut. What would you have done differently, and which part of his story hit closest to home?